This morning for our topic, we're studying clean and unclean. And I want to pick back up from what we looked at last week, and so I will reground us in a few things as we begin, and certainly then to be able to bring us forward. One part when we consider the earthly sanctuary, the tabernacle that was in the wilderness, that was erected by Moses. The primary purpose of it was that the people might be able to approach God. God wanted to live among them and to dwell among them. We said that from the giving of the commandment in Exodus chapter 20, that the people immediately, they broke the covenant. Remember, they said that all that God has said that we will do, all the words that he has spoken that we will perform, and they broke it. In fact, they didn't want to hear God speak to them. And the reason why they didn't want to hear him speak, because they were afraid. It's like when he spoke, it was thunder, it was peals of lightning. There was a great noise that was there. The mountain was on fire. Smoke coming from a distance. And so they said, well, God, or rather Moses, you speak to us and not God, because we don't want to hear him speaking. They were afraid. They were terrified. So Moses, as he went up to talk with God, he would commune with him, and he came back down. And at one point, he had been with him for 40 days. It was actually several experiences. He went up, back and down the mountains. And he came down after 40 days and nights on the mountain, and his face was like all aglow, was like glowing from the presence of God. Moses was unaware that this was happening, but when he came to the people, they said, well, you need to put a veil on because you're so bright from being in his presence. And so when he talked with the people, he had the veil on, but when he went up to meet with God, he would remove the veil. And then it was time for the dedication of the temple. And in the prospect of the temple, in Exodus 25 and verse 8, we read that God said, let them make a sanctuary that I might dwell among them. And so he wanted to be among his people. The desire was that they would be able to go to him, and he would also be able to be approached to them. And yet there was one thing that we also can see in the sanctuary that was very evident, was that God is holy. And that the very nature of God is seen in holiness and who he is. It's a part of his character, his divine being. He is holy. We saw a glimpse of his holiness in the first few books of Exodus. And you recall that in Exodus, when Moses saw the bush that was burning, he approached into the bush that was burning but was not consumed by fire. You remember that as he came up to God, or came closer, that the Lord spoke to him and said, take off your shoes because you're standing on holy ground. So there's that aspect of God being holy. And so in order for one to be able to approach to him, one also must be holy. And yet there's only so much of God's holiness that as human beings that we're able to endure. Again, the same as with Moses, only so far he could come. Yeah, even Moses said, well, God, let me see you. And God said, well, no man can see me and yet live. Of God's holiness, of his character, we're able to see it. And the sanctuary service was showing us again that God is holy, and he wanted his people to be holy as well, to come and to engage with him. Now, we learned that there were some things that caused them to be impure. We called them like ceremonially impure. These were not things that were, quote, sins, things that were sinful, but these were just a part of life that would make a person to be unclean. And so if a person was considered to be unclean, then they could not go and meet God. They would not go into the temple because they were what we would call ritually or ceremonially impure or unclean. So the concept of clean, and there was a concept of being unclean, concept of being pure and a concept of being impure. And again, this is not, again, referring to sin or a sinful condition or conduct, rather just a state. And one of these things that we saw clearly demonstrated was that there were certain illnesses or sicknesses that would bring about impurity that would be associated with death. And so this is the opposite of God. Right? God is life, and the opposite is death. So anything that was reminder or a symbol of death, it couldn't come into his presence. One of the things that we saw was in Numbers 19 and verse 11. Having contact with a dead body or a corpse will disqualify someone from going into the sanctuary. So if you had a rodent, an animal that died, and you touched the corpse, then you were defiled. You were ceremonially unclean. If a family member passed and you had to move the body or you lifted the body, you had some contact with the body, you were ceremonially unclean. So you were not allowed at that point then to go into the sanctuary until either, depending upon what the condition was, until sunset or until you had bathed or took several weeks to transpire, yet you were unable to go in. So there were certain things that precluded, and death was one thing that would preclude. We also saw that the other thing was any bodily discharge will cause a person to be unclean. Hence, whenever a woman was on a menstrual cycle, then she was unclean. And in fact, anybody that touched anything that she had come in contact with, they were also unclean. So any bedding was considered to be unclean. If it was a couch or a seat or chair, wherever she had been, it was considered to be unclean. We also saw that a man would be unclean from any semen leaving his body or any type of lesion coming forth. He was pronounced unclean. Well, we saw then that any type of discharge from a person, again, that would pronounce them ceremonially unclean. So they were unable, again, to go inside the sanctuary because of this. One of the other pieces we saw in Leviticus was that childbirth would also make a person ceremonially unclean. If it was a man-child that was born, then 7 days was given, and then the woman would be cleansed by a sanctuary temple or service. If it were as a girl, then it would be a period of 14 days. Why the difference? No one knows. Yet there was a difference between male and female, 7 days versus 14 days. And at the end of the 7 days or the 14 days, then she would come forth and offer a dove for a purification, and then she would be considered to be unclean. So again, in that intervening period, she couldn't go inside the sanctuary because she would be considered to be unclean. So if a woman was on a menstrual cycle, she could not go inside the sanctuary. If a man had released any type of discharge, either semen or otherwise, he could not go inside the sanctuary at that point. He was unclean. Why? Because God was or is holy. So it was setting a principle that in order to come into his presence, you also have to be holy because he is holy. The other things that we saw were that various skin diseases, in Leviticus 13 through 14, would also cause a person to be considered unclean. One of the main things that we read about and you think of when you read the Old Testament and the New Testament is the disease of leprosy. And yet leprosy is not the only thing that is listed there in Leviticus. In fact, as you read through Leviticus, they're not reading and talking in terms of like scientific terms of what we would use. So essentially, you would take this and say any type of skin lesion, they monitored it because they didn't know the extent of what it was. So if there was a rash that someone had, if it were eczema, if it was dandruff, if it were vitiligo, anything that happened to be able to impact the skin, they would have to check it out to make sure it was not contagious. And ultimately, a person who was unclean could not approach the sanctuary. In fact, they could not even approach others lest they be able to contaminate them. So there's a concept here of if something that is impure, if it came into contact with something that was pure, it will cause contamination. So that which was impure could transfer to that which was pure. You saw that again by the concept of the woman. That anybody who touched anything that she touched was impure. You saw that with the dead. Anyone that touched anything that the dead had come in contact with, that was impure. You saw that in contact with the leper. Anything that the leper had touched, it was also now impure. So there's a transference from impurity from one vessel to the next. Leviticus chapter 11, there's a classification of various animals and so forth that are considered to be clean and unclean. As you start reading through them, it talks about those that divide the hoof and or those that chew the cud, those that split the hoof, those that are cloven-footed, and so forth. You read about those that the fish that have fin, those have scales, and so forth. And then there's a classification between what is clean and what is considered to be unclean in Leviticus chapter 11, and various things fall in that scope. And when we consider those things again, if a person had consumed those things, then they were also now unclean. Again, ceremonially they were unclean. And then the last piece was that, again, Leviticus 5, touching anything that was unclean caused that person to be unclean. So unclean can make someone else unclean. Okay? Unclean or impure can make something impure. In Isaiah chapter 6, considering and keeping that in mind, in Isaiah chapter 6, so again, through the sanctuary, a person needed to be ceremonially pure to go into God's presence. Now, of course, they're understood spiritually pure, morally pure, but they also had to be ceremonially clean to go into his presence. You just couldn't waltz in any type of way. So even though a person may have been spiritually pure, if they were ceremonially unclean, they could not go into his presence, because his presence, it was of holiness, of his very divine nature. Now in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1, it says, in the third year, or in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also that the Lord was sitting upon a throne. He was high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims, and each one had 6 wings, and with 2 wings he covered his face, and with 2 wings he covered his feet, and with 2 wings he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. And the whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house is filled with smoke. And Isaiah cried out, he said, Woe is me, for I am undone. I am undone. So the vision that Isaiah sees is that in the temple, he sees the presence of God, and these angels crying out that God is holy. God is holy. And they're covering their face, they're covering their feet, they're covering their body. It's covering the aspect of that he is so holy that they're not gazing upon him and just looking upon him. That there's a respect and awe that is upon them. And so they are shielding themselves, and they are coming forward, and they're moving backwards, and they're crying out that God is holy. And Isaiah, as he sees this experience, he reflects upon himself, and he cries out because he recognizes that he is undone, or he is filthy. I am in the presence of God, and even the angels that are there, these angels that have not erred, angels that have not sinned, and they are veiling themselves, they're covering themselves, and they're crying out that God is holy. And Isaiah has a sense of his unworthiness, and he says, I'm undone. I am a man of unclean lips. I dwell amongst those who are unclean. Notice what happens next. It says, my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And then one of the seraphims came with a live coal in his hand. Going back to the sanctuary language and the altar. He's bringing a coal from off the altar. Now the altar is pure. The altar is holy, right? Because it has been devoted to God. It's being used for God's service. And anything that is consecrated to God, it is holy. It's set apart. It is being used for a sacred purpose. And what we've read already in the Old Testament, particularly, is that anything that is impure, if it comes into contact with something that is pure, what happens to that which is pure? It becomes impure. It becomes defiled. It becomes contaminated. Now notice that it says that one of the seraphim has a live coal in his hand, and he takes it and he puts it on the lips of Isaiah. And it says, Lo, this have touched your lips, and your iniquity has been taken away and your sin is purged. What just happened? The coal transfers purity to Isaiah. It's not backwards. He is not now destroyed by God's holiness, but God's holiness is being transferred to Isaiah. He has been touched with a coal. The coal doesn't become corrupt. The coal doesn't become impure. Rather, God's holiness is transferred to Isaiah. We see a bigger glimpse of this in Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 1 through verse 12. Ezekiel 47, verse 1 through 12. This is the promise that God had given of the restoration of the temple to take place in Ezekiel, or throughout Ezekiel. Now, a lot of this didn't take place, like particularly you read chapters 40 through 48, it talks about like the rebuilding of the temple. And for those who are devout in their belief that a third temple will be rebuilt, they see chapter 40 through 48 of like this temple being rebuilt again. Reality is this temple is speaking, it was a literal temple that would have been built if Israel had fulfilled its destiny. But notice that there are some pieces here of what it says. It says in verse 1, and afterward that he brought me again into the door of the house, and behold, the warders, they issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward. This is the house of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. But the forefront of the house stood toward the east, and the warders came down from under the right side of the house at the south side of the altar. And then he brought me out of the way of the gate northward, and led me about the way without into the utter gate by the way that looketh eastward. And behold, there ran out warders on the right side. And when the man that had the lion in his hand went forth eastward, he measured it, and he brought it. He measured it 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the warders. The warders were to the ankles. And again he measured 1,000, and he brought me through the warders. The warders were to the knees. And again he measured 1,000, he brought me through, and the warders were to the loins. So you picture that as he's walking through, this water that is flowing out of the temple, all right, is leaving from, not going into the temple, but the water is flowing out of the temple. And as he is walking and measuring it, the water level is rising, right? It says first it's at my ankles, and then from the ankles it rises up to his knees, and from his knees is now to his loin. So it's like the further I walk, the more water there is coming out of the temple. It's gushing out of the temple. Afterward he measured 1,000, and there was a river that I could not pass over. So finally the water was so great, or so deep, that Ezekiel can't pass over it. All right? This is water that is flowing out of the temple in Ezekiel that he sees. It says, for the waters were risen, waters to swim in. A river that could not be passed over. Or it was deep enough that I would be able to swim in it, but broad enough that I couldn't get to the other side. And he said unto me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he brought me and caused me to return to the brink of the river. And now when I had returned, behold, at the bank of the river, there were very many trees on the one side and on the other. So I want you to visualize like this temple that is built, and water is flowing out of the temple. It's like flooding out of the temple. And as it goes out from a stream, it begins to get deeper and it gets wider. And on either side are what? Here, trees. Right? There are trees on this side, there are trees on the other side. So you have the temple, water flowing out, and you have trees that are aligning both sides. Then he said to me, these waters issue out toward the east country, and they go down into the desert, and they go into the sea. All right, and the sea that is referring to is talking about they're going all the way to the Dead Sea. Now, if you know anything about the Dead Sea, of course, the name ought to step up to you that that's something of significance. It's dead. Why is it dead? Because the mineral content is so high that nothing can live in it. Now, some writers say that it is also dead in that it receives like water from tributaries pouring into it, but it has no outlet for the water to flow out. And that's the same as us as human beings. If we only take into ourselves but don't pour out, then we become corrupt. We become dead. In order to be alive, you have to have that water flowing in and the water being able to flow out. So this water comes into this Dead Sea. It says that it goes into the Dead Sea, in which being brought forth into the sea, notice it says that the waters will be healed. Now, again, typically speaking, when something that is pure is brought into contact with something that is impure, the reaction is that the pure becomes impure. When something that is clean comes into something that's unclean, the reaction is that it is considered to be unclean. We saw Isaiah bringing forth or receiving a coal from off the altar, and that which was pure has now become clean. The water is flowing out of the sanctuary, and it's coming in contact, and it comes into contact with that which is death. And instead of the river of life becoming a river of death, it now becomes, the Dead Sea now becomes a living sea. It says that the sea, the waters, are healed. And it shall come to pass that everything that liveth, which moveth, wheresoever the river comes, it will live, and there shall be a very great multitude of fish, because these waters shall come there. So the fish that would not live in the Dead Sea are now able to live in the Dead Sea by virtue of this living water that has flowed to it from the temple. So they shall be healed, and everything that shall come into the water shall live, that cometh. And it shall come to pass that the fishers shall stand up upon it from Engedi even unto Engelim, and they shall be a place to spread forth nets. Their fish shall be according to their kinds, as the fish of the great sea, exceeding many. But the miry places thereof and the marshes thereof shall not be healed. They shall not be given salt. Meaning those areas that it's not come in contact with, they will stay the same. The areas that it does have contact with are going to be healed. And by the river upon the bank thereof, and on this side, on that side, all trees grow for meat, whose leaf shall not fade, neither shall the fruit thereof be consumed. It shall bring forth new fruit according to his months, because their waters they issued out of the sanctuary, and the fruit thereof shall be medicine, and the leaf thereof will serve as medicine. So what do we have here in a nutshell? We have this water flowing out of the temple, right? And that water is symbolizing God's presence going forth to be able to heal. So we see this again in the New Testament now. I won't read the story. I'll refer you back to Matthew chapter 8. Jesus has close contact with a leper. And by contacting the leper, according to the verse of Matthew chapter 8, is that Jesus touches the leper. And what should cause the leper to be, or rather what should cause Jesus to be unclean, the reverse actually happens. The leper is cleansed. He doesn't transfer his leprosy to Jesus and make Jesus contaminated, but rather Jesus transfers his purity, his healing to the leper and makes the leper clean. We read in Luke chapter 7, 14 through 16 previously that Jesus also had contact with the dead. In this case, he stopped the procession, touches the coffin. And once more again, by touching the coffin, Jesus should be contaminated. He should be unclean. Rather, he is not contaminated. His holiness is not corrupted, but he imparts life to the dead. The dead now rises, the dead lives, because he has come in contact with Jesus. And then the third example that we looked at was in Luke chapter 8, 43 through 48. It was the story of the woman who had the issue of blood for 12 years. And she just touched the hem of Jesus' garment. And again, according to the Levitical reading in the ceremonial law, Jesus and anyone else she touched would have been considered to be unclean. But Jesus says that virtue has gone out of me. Like purity, holiness has flown from me and has brought forth healing. He said, woman, your faith hath healed you. Go in peace. So there are a couple of things to consider there as we see this. Remember and think of that symbolism in Ezekiel that, and compare it to what we saw in the temple in the wilderness. In the temple in the wilderness, the people were to come and to meet with God. Ultimately, that did not have its full effect because of the people. When you look at Ezekiel's vision in Ezekiel chapter 47, it's a different picture that is there. Like a beautiful temple being built and dedicated, and water flows out of the temple and it goes forth to people. Right, so the temple healing comes forth from the temple. Another one, people needed to be holy to be able to come into the temple. And now the scene is reversed. From the temple, there comes forth life. Right? From the temple, there comes forth holiness. From the temple, there comes forth his presence. And so what was all that temple, and what is some of the meaning behind it? Well, Jesus said in John chapter 2, he said that if you destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll raise it back up again. He referred to himself as being a temple. And they didn't understand what he meant. They're like, well, hey, this temple has been 40 and 60 years in building. How will you be able to build it up in 3 days? You're out of your mind if you can do this in 3 days, but it's taken us decades to be able to build. In fact, temple wasn't even completed at this time. It was not completed until right before 70 A.D. Yet Jesus spoke of himself as being a temple. He said that I am a temple, and if this temple, if it is destroyed, will be raised up in 3 days. So greater than what Ezekiel is seeing. Again, that would have been a literal temple that would have been built. Christ personifies that. He comes and he lives on the earth, and he's going forth, and he's bringing forth with him healing to where he goes. And not only does he bring healing, but he says of us in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 16 to his disciples, and 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and 16, he says, know ye not that you are the temple of God. So Christ is this embodiment of the temple, but he also says, my believers, my followers, that you also are the temple of God. And if we follow that theme then, if he being the temple, him calling for his people to be the temple, then we also would follow the same theme of this water that came forth out of the vision in Ezekiel. So this was like a living water that came forth from the temple. Again, in John chapter 7, it says, and Jesus answered and said unto her, this is John 4 rather, if thou knewest the gift of God and who it is that said unto you, give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked of him, and he would have given you living water. Now, there's lots of water you can buy. You can go to Whole Foods, Rayleigh's, Safeway, and walk down the water aisle. You have tons of water to buy. Filtered water, carbonated water, drinking water, sweetened water, alkaline water, distilled water, purified water. And each one of them touts to be what? The best. All of them just water, spring water, mountain water, glacier water. Everyone claims to have something the other one doesn't have. And the reality of it is, most of it is tap water. Just straight from the faucet and bottled at the source. But we like to pay a couple of extra bucks because their tap water tastes maybe a little better than our tap water, right? So non-fluorinated, non-fluoridated, and so forth. Everyone claims to be a little better than the other. And this well that she is drawing this water from, it was Jacob's well. It had been drawn out centuries before. And so it was important. It's like, okay, hey, this is our well. And again, we would have maybe an affinity to this. And so this is her well that her ancestors have come century after century after century to draw from. It was no better than any other water that was around, but just the nostalgic effect was there, right? And Jesus wants to drink. And by the way, when he asks her for a cup to drink from, she doesn't have like a Jewish cup to give. The only cup she would have is a cup that she herself were drinking from. And if she were drinking from the cup, then this would mean, because she was a Gentile, she would be making Jesus unclean. Now, maybe are you glad that you don't live in a time period where everything could make you unclean? That'd be a lot to conjure up and to remember, right? You know, all right, you a dead animal's in the house, you moved it, okay, now you're unclean. You know, like it's a rat, a roach, a loved one that was sick. Like you would be glad. That'd be a lot to keep track of and to know, did that make me impure? Did that make me unclean? For him to have drunk from a water vessel that she had would have made him unclean. Now, he's not breaking the law. Like some people think that he's like just, he doesn't care about the laws and so forth. So he's just like a renegade and doing whatever he wants to do. Like, you know, like laws be damned, I'll do whatever I want to do. That's not what he is doing. Because he is the one who gave the laws. He was the one who said, this will make you clean, this will make you unclean. He's not walking around saying, well, I'm above the law, do whatever I want to do. He is subjecting himself to the very same tenets that he has communicated to his people. But the distinction here is that he is God in the flesh. That his holiness is something that cannot be fathomed. And so when he touches something, it does not make him filthy. Rather, his purity, his holiness transfers from him outward. Him touching someone dead doesn't make him dead. It makes the person come to life. Him touching someone who is unclean does not make him unclean. It makes that person clean. It is not a transfer to make him filthy, but it is a transfer of his virtue, his righteousness, his purity, his holiness, making that he comes into contact with, thus consecrated as such. So he says to the woman, give me to drink. You would have asked me, and I would have given you of this living water. And the woman said unto him, well, sir, you don't have anything to draw with, and the well is deep, so how are you going to get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob that gave us the well, and he drank from this well himself and from his children and his cattle? And Jesus said to her that whosoever drinketh of this water from this well, they're going to thirst again. All right, so I don't care if you get spring water, glacier water, moon water, you're going to need to drink it again. It may satisfy the thirst in the moment, but you're going to get thirsty again. He said, to this water that I have to give you, that if you drink this, you never need to thirst again. And she said, well, then what water is this? He says, and I'm offering to you this water that is a well spring of everlasting life. In other words, he is saying, I am this living water. If you drink of me, you will never thirst again. So that same water that flowed out of the temple that Ezekiel is seeing, Jesus is saying in John chapter 4, hey, I am this living water that if you drink, you will live. If you're famished and parched, you will not thirst again. If you're bordering on the precipice of death, you will have life again. Drink of me, I am this fountain of living waters. And he does not exclude it to himself. John chapter 7 and verse 39, he says that he that believes on me, as the scripture have said, that out of his belly shall flow living waters. Living waters will come forth from him. as his believers, we also go forth caring for living water. So wherever in the parched areas were that the water flowed out in the desert and it leaves an oasis, so he intends then that his church, his disciples, in that where as you go, as you talk, as you minister, as you impact, as you influence, then that you also are spreading the seeds of life, bringing forth living water. That as you go out into a world, and I go into a world that is of darkness and despair and death, that as you go forth, then that as you come in contact with individuals, that you might bring forth his holiness, his character, his grace, his mercy, that is able to change, is able to transform. 2 Corinthians 7 and verse 1, it says then, these promises, dearly beloved then, we may take these promises that are given to us, and we can cleanse ourselves then of all filthiness of the flesh and filthiness of the spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Hebrews 12 and 14 says, and follow after peace and holiness, without which no man will be able to see God. It's the purity and the holiness that come from him that he imparts to give forth to the world. Now, in Revelation chapter 22 and verse 1 through 3, that temple that Ezekiel had built, it is not built. We get another glimpse of it now further in the New Testament in Revelation chapter 22. You'll start noticing maybe some of the similarity that you will see here. And as you look in Revelation chapter 22, again, you picture in mind that from what we saw in the Torah, the Old Testament, those particular passages related to the cleansing, that impurity was contagious. And because purity was contagious, that holiness was safeguarded or was protected. But as we transition through, and we see in Jesus showing that holiness is contagious. And that sin and sickness and death, that retreats from him. It's like he goes in pursuit, it runs. And so we see the culmination in Revelation 22. It says, and he showed me a pure river of water of life that is clear as crystal. Of course, we're going to the New Jerusalem now. And this is a water that is coming forth, and it's called, again, the water of life. And we've read about that symbolism over in the book of Ezekiel. We also see it over in John and such. So this water of life that comes forth, it comes from the throne of God, and it comes forth out of the Lamb. Similar to what we saw in the book of Ezekiel. It came forth from like the throne. It came forth from where God dwelt in the book of Ezekiel, and it flowed out. Right? So now in Revelation, water again is flowing out from the throne of God and from the Lamb. That fountain of living waters is flowing forth. And it says in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river was the tree of life. So this water flows through, similar to what we saw in Ezekiel. And on either side is the tree of life. Like Ezekiel talked about, there were trees on the one side of the bank, trees on the other side of the bank. This one is similar yet different. It's like the tree of life is flowing, or rather the river of life is flowing through the center. And you think of the tree of life as having like a gap in between. It's like the bottom is here, and it comes up and it joins in the top. Right? One tree at the top, and then it breaks apart into two, and the river of life flows through the center of it. And that tree of life, it says, that there bears 12 manner of fruit, and that it yields its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Same thing we were reading over in the book of Ezekiel, right? The tree was for the healing of the nations. And it says, and there will be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants will serve him. They will serve him day and night. The temple that Ezekiel saw is fulfilled through Christ. This New Jerusalem then has a place that is dedicated, and from it also flow out this water river of life. Whoever comes and drinks and eats the eating of it and the drinking are for the healing of the nations. And so the nations are healed, the nations are restored. How is all of that possible? Well, it's possible because of Jesus. In John chapter 20 in closing, St. John chapter 20, he is the one that is the ultimate source. If we are impure, we need not stay away, because he says, I invite you to come to me with your impurity. I invite you to come with me with your sins. I invite you to come to me with your sinfulness. You need not try to make yourself pure. In Leviticus, before they could come in, they had to make themselves pure from the ceremonial cleansings and that they would take part of. Now, Jesus gives the invitation, says, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you a rest. He said, all that the Father giveth, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. He says, I go in search of the lost sheep, seeking to be able to bring and to put him back. And when I have found the lost sheep, I put him upon my neck. I come back in, and I call others to rejoice with me, because that which we thought was dead is found and is alive. He is casting in his lot forever with us. John chapter 20, at the crucifixion, John chapter 19. And verse 34. John 19 and verse 34. After the Lord had been crucified, there was question as to whether or not he was dead. The Pharisees and the judges and the rulers, they were on a tight timeline. They needed to make sure that he was off the cross before Sabbath. They had ceremonies to take care of. They wanted to make sure that he is off the cross before Sabbath. And they're looking at the sun setting in the western sky, and they know that crucifixions can take a very long time, that some don't die on the day of, some lingered even days and weeks. They want to speed up the process to make sure that he is dead, because he was the one that they were most concerned about from all the things that he had said. And so the soldiers went to check on him, and they had been asked to break their legs to be able to speed up the death. That was a process of making them die quicker. How would it make them die quicker? Well, it made them die quicker not from the pain of breaking their legs, but from the fact that they were unable to push up off of their legs now to get oxygen in. So essentially what they were doing was that they were asphyxiating the person so that they would die from not having oxygen to breathe. The lungs would fill with blood. So they said, break their legs so that they would die quicker. And when they went to the thieves that were beside Jesus, their legs were broken. According to verse 32, the soldiers came and they broke the legs of the first and of the other who was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was dead already, and so they did not break his legs. So they look up at Jesus, they see he's not breathing in, he's not exhaling, he's dead. So they don't bother to break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and this was to test to see, is he dead? And if he were not dead, then this would kill him instantly. His spear is driven in, and so if the scripture, there came forth then a stream, one of blood and one of water. The living water was shed to purify that we might be able to live. The blood was shed to purify that we might be able to live, to change that which was filthy, to make it to be clean. When a woman is to give birth, one of the things that doctors watch for and that she watches for is, when does the water break? Right? When the water breaks, it's a reckoning of humanity to know that it's time for birth. And on the cross, as the water and the blood flowed, cleansing came from him. Zechariah says that there's a fountain that will be open in David's house. All will be able to go in and to be able to be plunged and to be purged. We write in the psalm that there is a fountain filled with blood, drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunge beneath that flood and lose all their guilty stain. In Desire of Ages 568, it says that Jesus knows the circumstances of every soul. You may say, I am sinful, very sinful. You may be. But the worse you are, the more you need Jesus. We don't stay away. He says, come and I will be thou clean. Come and I will heal you. Come, I will change you. Come, I will save you. But I am filthy and I will make you impure. It says, no, you will not make me impure, I'll make you pure. But if I come, I'll make you unclean. No, you cannot make me unclean, I will make you clean. But if I come, you will not receive me. No, if you come, I will receive you. I'll set a crown upon you, I will clothe you with purple and scarlet, I will put the ring upon your hands. I will pronounce a blessing upon you. He turns no weeping, contrite one away. He does not tell to any all that he might reveal, but he bids every trembling soul to take courage. Freely will he pardon all who come to him for forgiveness and for restoration. Father in heaven, we come to you today for healing and for restoration. We'll come to you asking that you would please look upon us and see us in our sinfulness and our undone ways, our worldly ways, our unchristlike ways. We pray your mercy and for your grace. We cannot cleanse ourselves. We cannot make ourselves pure in your sight. We can't do anything, but we can just give ourselves to you and believe that you will impart to us your grace and take away from our impurity, driving it away, and cover us with your grace, your holiness, and your righteousness. Thank you for making it a way possible that we'll be able to live in your presence. Thank you that you bring from our death, you bring life. From our despair, you bring hope. From our sins, you bring your holiness and purity. I pray again that you would bless and keep us again. Help us to turn our eyes away from ourselves and to place them to you. But we ask in Jesus' name, amen.